Welcome to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Krochmalnek. Together, we'll explore the art of turning tiny seeds into a thriving microgreens empire, sharing insights, coveted secrets, and strategic wisdom from building one of Canada's largest microgreens farms. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations with leading figures in the world of microgreens. On today's episode of the podcast, we are answering your questions from social media, everything from tips to growing cilantro microgreens, the best soil and lights to use, ideal light schedules, the best way to sell microgreens when starting out, and so much more. Stay tuned. We have a great episode for you today. The first question is, what do you recommend to use for disinfecting dirty trays? So the first thing with disinfection is you always want to get rid of the dirt first. Any soil residue, root residue, plant material, that all has to be removed as much as possible. I learned this the hard way. For many years, I would disinfect and then remove the dirt because it's kind of like, or try to do it all in one step. But the best way and most effective way to actually disinfect and kill the bacteria and fungus on your trays is to get rid of the dirt, soil residue, and root residue first, then disinfect the trays. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be you want to use a disinfectant that ideally is not super harsh for the plants. So a lot of people use bleach. It works. It's a very strong disinfectant, but bleach is very toxic to plants. So if there is any residue on the trays after disinfecting with bleach, it may have a negative impact on the growth of the plants. Generally, this won't be a problem, but if you're using a lot of bleach and there is a lot of residue, this can be a problem. The better option would be to use a product called Xylitol, which is a combination of hydrogen peroxide and vinegar. Now, hydrogen peroxide is a really great organic disinfectant that's allowed for organic and non-organic production. It's what a lot of farms use, and it's very effective at killing bacteria and fungus extremely well. So the other thing is vinegar. So vinegar is also a great disinfectant. I would say hydrogen peroxide would be a better option. And the best option is to use a product that has both in it, which is Xylitol. So if you can't get a hold of that, rubbing alcohol is an option, but I generally wouldn't recommend that because it's very pricey and it's very toxic to breathe that in all the time. So the least toxic, most effective is hydrogen peroxide and vinegar. And if you can't get one or the other, then at least one is better than none for that. Next question is, what are the best places to buy seeds? So this is a great question. So in my experience, 10 years growing microgreens commercially, the three best seed companies would be number one, Johnny Select Seeds in Maine. So they're great because they have both organic and non-organic seed, and they have really, really high quality seed. So in my experience, you don't want to cheap out on seed. I've made that mistake early on, and it often will cost a lot more than it will save you. So if, for example, you have a seed and it's half the price, let's say, of a better quality seed, but you're getting really poor germination or really low yields, the seed is only a small cost of the total production. So buying good seed is really, really important. So Johnny's is always my number one because they sell both organic and non-organic, and on both ends, quality is great. Now, obviously, my farm was a certified organic farm, so we had to buy only organic seed. So Mums is a great option. That's really, really cost effective. Even for non-organic growers, Mums is really great in a lot of ways. The only concern I have is there's more inconsistency in the quality of seed. So sometimes you get a batch that's great, and then the next time it'll be subpar quality. So Mums has by far the best pricing in the industry, but quality can be hit or miss. And then the last one, which I really love, is High Mowing Organic Seeds, which is in Vermont. And they're great. They only sell organic seed. Prices are really great for organic seed, and quality is top notch. So depending on what your market is and who you're targeting, if you're certified organic, if you're selling it as an organic product, but maybe not certified organic, maybe High Mowing or Mums might be a better option. If you're looking for the best quality seed, Johnny's and High Mowing would be the best option. If you're looking to go down the route of lower cost seed, Mums would be your best option. Next question is, what is the best way to sell microgreens starting out? So there's generally three main categories of customers, which is direct to consumer, retail stores, and restaurants. Those are the three main. There's obviously a lot of others, but those are where the majority of microgreens farms get their revenue from. Now, starting out, I always recommend you do direct to consumer because it's the least risky outlet and it's the lowest barrier to entry. So if, for example, you wanted to start out with retail stores and you start selling your product, they want to buy it, and then you just start growing and you start running into growing issues. Let's say you didn't realize that in the summer months there's a difference in the winter months, and the crop doesn't taste as good, or it has disease issues, or you're not getting the yield you expected. That's going to damage the relationship with the grocery store because you won't be able to deliver what you promised you can deliver. Now, direct to consumer, that may still happen, but the risk is much lower because there's so many consumers that are potential customers, whereas there's a much more limited amount of retail stores or restaurants that you can target. So going direct to consumer has the benefit of, if you make mistakes, the risk is very low for the long-term success of the business. It's pretty high margin to start out, and it's the lowest barrier to entry. So it's the easiest customers to get. So that's what I always recommend for someone starting out, is to go direct to consumer. What is the most efficient way to sow seeds? So the most efficient way is to use automation, but I won't get into that. Just from using the most least cost methods as a farm starting out, the best way to sow seeds would be to have some sort of accurate scale, and then you weigh out the seeds. So if you want, 10 grams for broccoli per tray, you would weigh out 10 grams and then sprinkle it evenly over the tray. Now, the best way to do this at a larger scale until you get some sort of automation in place would be to do things in groupings. So you would weigh out the seeds. So you get, let's say you have 100 trays of broccoli microgreens to grow this week. You would have 100 cups that you would buy, and then you'd weigh out 10 grams in each cup, and then do all the sprinkling at once, and then do all the watering at once. So that way it's much more efficient than doing one, grouping things together. It may not seem like it's that big of a deal, but when you're doing hundreds of something at a time, fractions of a second or a few seconds difference will make a substantial difference in how long it takes you to do something. So it's a good methodology to use when starting out with microgreens or when expanding your business. Is a lot of the tasks can be very seem like, oh, it doesn't really make a difference if I do it this way or this way. But if you really actually time it and see, oh, this way is actually 3 seconds faster, you multiply 3 seconds by 100 trays, that's 300 seconds. And then you do that by a bunch of different tasks, you can save many hours off your week by doing things more efficiently. So that's what I recommend for sowing seeds, and to take that methodology and apply that to other areas of your business. Next question is, what is the best soil and lights to use for growing microgreens? So for soil, what I generally recommend is two products, both made by Promix. One is Promix HP, which is the non-organic soil that I'd recommend. And then there's Promix HP, which is the organic version of Promix HP. Now, both are really great soils. And the reason I recommend them is because they're easily available. It's someone that does consulting for farms around the world, and with a target on North America. If I would recommend a specific brand that I can get here, but you guys can't get it elsewhere, that doesn't really help. So while there may be specific products that would work better in your local area, as a general recommendation, Promix, HP, and MP are really great soils that are easy to get and provide a lot of value per unit of, or per bag. So any sort of compressed bale of soil, you're going to get much better value than you will with a loose bag soil. So I get a lot of questions about brands like Happy Frog and things like Coconut Coir. So the issues with these loose bag soils is that you're paying a lot for shipping. So with the Promix HP and MP, they come compressed in a bale. So while it's 3.8 cubic feet, which is 107 liters per bale, it almost doubles when you decompress it. So you're actually getting twice the amount of soil that you would in a standard bag soil. So it's much more cost effective. And then things like Coconut Coir, that come compressed in a brick, besides the quality issues with a lot of coconut coir, is very high salt levels, which is very problematic for growing any plant, let alone microgreens. I think honestly the biggest issue is trying to scale with coconut coir. So a lot of people really like coconut coir. It's a great growing medium. In a lot of ways, it's more sustainable than a peat-based growing media. But the challenge is every time that you need to have soil, you have to wet that brick of coconut coir quite a bit and break it up by hand. It's very, very time consuming. I spent maybe 6 months using coconut coir in the early years and was like, this is crazy. This is taking up way too much of my time. Whereas you can take a bale of Promix HP or MP and kind of just fluff it up and it's ready to use. And you don't have to worry about salt issues or having imbalances in nutrients and things like that. Now for lights, the best lights I would recommend, again, it comes down to what is the best option for people that they can actually buy, around the world or in North America. And that is the Barina 42 watt, 4-foot LED fixtures. You can get them on Amazon. They're very, very cheap. They're really good quality for the price. I've been using them just in a cabinet for bonsais for many years and haven't had a single one burn out or have any sort of quality issues. And pretty much everyone I know that uses them is the same way. They're not the strongest lights that you can get, but for a value perspective, they're the best lights you can get, output versus price. So the best value is the simple way to put it. And generally speaking, I recommend the spectrum that gives off a purple hue rather than the white hue. So a lot of people think of white lights are the way to go. And they are in some ways. If you're growing cannabis or tomatoes, plants can only use so much of that red and blue spectrum, which gives that purple hue to the lights. But when you're growing microgreens, you don't actually need that much light. And the red and blue spectrums are much, much more efficient for the plant to absorb the light than the white spectrum, which is more the green and yellow. So you can actually use less power and get the same output, or use the same amount of power and actually get more plant usable light. Therefore, your plants will grow faster, larger, and yield more. So if you have the option, if it's available, the ones that are purple hued will give you better results for the Barina lights. Do you have any tips on growing cilantro so you get most of the seeds off and keep the microgreens clean? Yes, so cilantro is definitely one of the trickier crops to grow. Getting the seeds off is definitely a challenge. So there's a couple of things to consider. First is, do you want to spend the time in getting the seed hulls off? There are ways to minimize them, but when I sold cilantro microgreens, what we would do is sell it with the seed on, because the seed of cilantro is actually just coriander, which is a common spice used in a lot of different cuisines. So for me, I personally actually liked it with the seed hull on because it gave a really nice additional flavor to the microgreens. But if you really do want to get them off, there would be two main recommendations I would give, which is number one, to get the seed hulls off of cilantro, what you want to do is use a monogerm seed. So a cilantro seed is actually two seeds together. So when the cilantro or coriander plant makes seed, there's actually two seeds stuck together that make a circle. So there's a lot of seed companies, including Johnny's, that will sell you something called monogerm seed, which is they split the seed in half so that there are half circles instead of a full circle, and only have one seed per seed you lift up, if that makes sense. And that helps the seed hulls come off a lot more. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is to keep weight on the trays for longer than just the germination time. So generally cilantro is about a 5-day germination period. Now I would recommend keeping it for 6, maximum 7 days with weight on it. And that'll actually help a lot of the seed hulls pop off. So that makes a big difference in actually getting the seed hulls off if you choose to go that route. But in my experience, most customers actually don't mind. I've had, in the 10 years that I've been growing cilantro microgreens, I think maybe a handful of customers ever said, hey, we don't want the product with the seed hulls on, or had a complaint about that. So it's very, very rare. And yeah, so I wouldn't really worry about that. And now keeping the microgreens clean, the main thing to to keep it clean is to make sure when you're harvesting that everything is dry. So the drier your canopy of your crop is, the more likely anything stuck to the seed, so any soil or vermiculite stuck to the actual seed hull, will fall off during harvest or before harvest. So if you keep it dry in the canopy, it'll keep it a lot more clean than if it's really moist, because then moisture makes things stick. When things are dry, they kind of fall off, and that would be my advice for that. Next, do you have a single price sheet that you give to all clients, or do you have a different price sheet for different customers? So this is a great question. I think it comes down to industry. So for direct to consumer, you want to have a standardized price for everyone. For selling directly to restaurants, you want to have a standardized price for everyone. For retail customers, you want to have a standard price for everyone. And if you're selling to distributors, you want to have a standard price for everyone. Now, there are exceptions to this. You may want to do promotions on your product. So, the first month a customer is on board with you, you give them a lower price as, a promotion to get them to try the product. You can do things like, buy one, get one free at the beginning, things like that. But generally speaking, you want to have consistent pricing. And the reason that this is you don't want to run into the scenario where, let's say you have two direct to consumer customers, and they so happen to be friends, and they're talking about, that they're both buying your microgreens. And one of them's like, oh, I'm paying this price. And the other one's, I'm paying this price. And they're like, wait, what? Why are you paying so much less than me? Or why are you paying more than me? So it just kind of avoids that potential conflict. Now, I wouldn't say that's a major concern, but it just keeps things simple to have a standardized price for each industry. Now, what you don't want to do is have the same price for direct to consumer as to retail, because you obviously need to sell at a lower price to sell into a grocery store to get it to be somewhat similar of a price that you're selling direct to consumer, because otherwise the price point is going to be way off. And same thing with restaurants and distributors. So you have to price it according to what the market demands and what makes sense, obviously, for you as well. So different customers, different customer segments, different prices, different customers within the same segment, same price. Next question. I'm using Promix MP as my growing medium. That's a good start. Should I be putting vermiculite on all of my crops? So I talk about this a lot with consulting clients, where vermiculite is a really great way to fix a bunch of different problems growing microgreens, but it's not always available everywhere. So it's a specific type of vermiculite, which is a fine vermiculite. It's more of a powder. So some people that are familiar with vermiculite, which, just so you know, vermiculite is pretty much just an expanded rock. So it's a natural input that comes from rocks. They extract this material, they heat it up, and it kind of pops up like popcorn. And it has a really great water holding capacity and has a lot of really other great benefits for growing microgreens. If you have it available, I highly recommend using it. It's a really great tool to mitigate mold and to insulate your crops from drying out. So those are the two main benefits for vermiculite. And for people that run into mold issues on the seeds or the soil of your crops, vermiculite is a really great way to help reduce that significantly, if not eliminate it. I haven't dealt with mold on microgreens in a very long time, because I've been using vermiculite for many, many years now. If you can get the fine vermiculite, which the brand that is most common in North America is called Thermo Rock, and the grade of vermiculite that I recommend is 3A, and that's a very fine vermiculite. That's what you want. If you're using a chunky vermiculite, which is often used to add into soil, that won't really help with the germination or with the mold issues, because it needs to cover the actual seeds. And chunky vermiculite it really can't do that. So if you have access to a hydroponic store near you, you can call them up and say, hey, can you get a fine grade of vermiculite? In this case, Thermorock 3A, if possible. 3B is also good. And if they can get that, I definitely recommend using it. It'll make your life a lot easier. But you don't have to use it. So it's not something that's required to grow microgreens. It's just something that I find really helps make life a lot easier as a microgreen grower. So the way I think of it is, the less you can worry about production, the more you can focus on sales, hiring, creating SOPs, automating, all the other things that will make your life easier. the goal is to minimize the amount of focus on production if you can. Once you have a good system in place, of course, like in the early days, you have to focus on production. But as you scale up, the less time you can focus on production by creating good systems, using good products that are consistent. As an example, I mentioned earlier, having good seed and know that the seed will be good each time you use it is a huge time saver. So all those things, including vermiculite, are great ways to make production as smooth and easy and least time consuming as possible. Do you keep all microgreen varieties under the same light schedule? Yes, I think it just makes sense to keep things really simple. Have an 18-hour on schedule, 6-hour off, and that just keeps things really simple. There might be a marginal benefit to increase for certain crops to 20, 22, or 24 hours. But if you're using 3 lights per level, which I highly recommend, you'll get really good results with 18 hours. If you're using 2 lights or 1 light per level, then you're probably not going to have as good results. And a simple way to think about this is, let's say you have 1 light per level, and you can get 20% higher yield with 3 lights per level. So if you're selling a tray for $20 and you're getting 20% more light output or more yield, if you're getting 20% more yield, then you're making $4 more per tray per week. So that's over $200 a year to purchase lights that cost $50. So the return is in 3 months you make the money back. And for me, anything that is less than 1 year payback period, 100% makes sense to do as a microgreens farm. If it's 1 to 3 years, it probably makes sense to you to do, but it depends on a lot of different factors like your financial situation and the growth trajectory. And if it's 3 to 5 years, then it makes sense to wait till it's within the 1 to 3 years to pull the trigger and purchase whatever that is to increase the efficiency of your farm. I'm in an area where microgreens are not well known. Any advice to educate the community and gain customers? Yes, this is a great question. There's lots of people that are in areas where microgreens aren't well known, and this is generally going to be more applicable to small towns, in Canada and the US and other countries that there's just not a grower in the area yet, and people aren't going to know what microgreens are. So this gives you a unique advantage and a unique disadvantage. The unique advantage is you don't have any competitors. So, once you get a customer, you don't need to worry about it. There's no one else there. So you get that customer, there's no one else they can really buy microgreens from. The disadvantage is there's more upfront work involved in educating them. And I think the best way to do this for direct to consumer, at least, is to use Facebook groups. So there's tons of groups on so many different things. Even in a small geographic area, you can find anything health related, literally anything. Will like microgreens work with every diet except for the carnivore diet. So whether you're vegan, vegetarian, keto, paleo, pretty much any diet, you can use a Facebook group to promote your microgreens, which is great. You can also focus on specific exercises. So going to the gym or running or any sort of sports activity, yoga, any sort of groups, anything health related, you can post your story, post that you're selling microgreens. Here's a link to the website, and that will drive traffic to people that may not know much about you or your farm or what microgreens are. And on your website, you can just have a very quick, like, microgreens are between 4 and 40 times more nutrient dense than mature vegetables. They taste a lot better than mature vegetables. They're easier to digest. All the sort of health benefits. And then the best way from there is to offer some sort of free sample to people, is almost surefire way to get people to sign up. Because once they try the product, they've never heard of it. And then all of a sudden you're expecting them to buy something never heard of. So having that free sample really makes a huge difference. And then from that free sample, you get them on a subscription service, and then you have a repeating customer week in, week out, which can last for several months. Sometimes some customers last several years. And then you kind of repeat that process, and you should have tons of direct to consumer customers in no time. Next question. A shop owner told me 1 grow light would work just as good as 3. Could you please speak to that? Yeah, so I kind of touched on this before, but if you just think about it, if let's say you have 12 hours of light on per day and you increase it to 18 hours of light, same lights, don't even have to switch to lights, you're getting 50% more light to the plants than if you were growing with 12 hours. Now, it's the same situation. If you're growing with one light and you're growing another crop with 3 lights, you're getting 3 times the amount of light on that crop, assuming the hours that the lights are on are the same. Now, some people might be thinking, oh, maybe 3 lights is overkill. And I can guarantee you it is not. So using one light, first of all, you're not going to get an even spread over the tray. So you often find that in the center, that the greens will be shorter and on the edges, they'll be longer. So that's a first indication for sure that you don't have enough light. The tray should look completely even from left to right and from the top to the bottom. And if it doesn't, that means you're not having even light levels. And then secondly, one light is just simply not enough. From my experience, I've grown a 250,000 trays of microgreens, and I can say from my experience that growing with one light is just not even close to sufficient. 2 lights, for some crops, you can get away with pea shoot sunflower. You can get, fairly similar yields, but for pretty much everything else, you will benefit having 3 lights per tray or per growing level. So pretty much 3 lights for 4 trays is the best way to go. And you'll have higher yields, you'll have better tasting product, better shelf life, faster growing, so less days to maturity. It's just all around a big benefit to have 3 lights instead of 1 or 2. What humidity do you recommend for microgreens? So generally speaking, between 40 and 60% will be totally fine for microgreens. I generally recommend it being closer to the 40%. Even if you got down to 30, 35 in the winter, that's totally okay. The main thing is you don't want it to be too high for 2 reasons. If you're growing in your home, you don't want any sort of high humidity issues in your home, which generally speaking, unless you're growing at a really large scale, won't happen because of microgreens. It may already be humid in your house in the summer, or if you're in a basement, for example. And the second reason is if it's in that lower range between like 35, 45% roughly, the canopy of the crop will be much drier and you'll get a better shelf life on the product. Now, there's a solution around this, which is to put fans on the crop, and putting fans on the crop will allow the canopy to dry out even if it's higher humidity. But generally speaking, between 40 and 60% is ideal. Trying to keep it on the lower end of that range is always best if possible. Anything above 60%, you're going to start running into some issues with really wet, damp microgreens, which you want to avoid. So as much as you can, keep it on a lower end. And the last question for today is, going into the winter, my grow room gets several degrees colder than in the summer months. Will this be a problem for the microgreens? So it really depends on how cold you're talking about, and also if it's Fahrenheit or Celsius. But even still, ideally, you want to have the same temperature year round. So if you're growing, 75 in the summer, you would want it to be roughly 75 in the winter. If it's not, the number one solution is, if it gets colder, it's easy. You just add a heater. So you can buy a plug-in a space heater, at Home Depot or Walmart, plug that in, set the temperature to what you want it to be. That'll solve that problem. That's super easy. If for some reason you don't have access to adding heat, then I would try my best to add electrical in that space to add heat, because it's really going to make a big difference. If it gets 5-10 degrees colder, it's really going to start slowing down your growth. So the ideal temperature for microgreens, in my opinion, is 80 Fahrenheit or 26 Celsius. Most people don't keep their house at that, so I don't recommend purposely like increasing your whole house temperature. If you can increase the grow room, great. If not, anywhere from 70 to 80 works totally fine. If you start getting less than 70, it really starts slowing down the growth. So if you're in your basement and it's 65 in the winter and it was 75 in the summer, you're going to see like a multiple day decrease in days to or increase in the days to maturity. The yield may be lower, things like that. So it is definitely important to try to keep the temperature the same as possible. If for some reason you can't, you may want to grow a few extra trays of each crop going into the colder months to make sure you have enough product for your customers. So I hope that helps. And thanks so much for listening, everyone. And stay tuned for the next episode of the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. To access a wealth of insights, just click the subscribe button, stay notified about each new episode, and enjoy all of this wisdom for free.
If you're ready to supercharge your microgreens business, visit microgreensconsulting.com for a gold mine of guides and resources. We've transformed thousands of microgreens businesses, and you're invited to join the success story. Let's stay connected. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Microgreens Consulting for exclusive content and expert tips and wisdom. If you found this episode insightful, please leave us a review, spread the word, and let's share microgreens magic with the world. Until next time, let curiosity fuel your growth and may happiness be your harvest. Happy growing, everyone.